Welcome to my channel Lanoveet. Today we will going to discuss about the anatomy of paranasal sinuses, and I am going to share you with the handwritten notes in which we will going to discuss about the important points about every sinus. So starting from the definition of paranasal sinus. So the paranasal sinuses are the air-filled spaces in the nasal cavities that extend into the cranial bones. The paranasal sinuses are actually the extensions of the nasal cavity that are air-filled, and they filled with the air and they extend into the cranial bones. That include the frontal bone, the ethamoidal bone, the sphenoid bone and the maxillary bone, and the corresponding name of these four sinuses. So the paranasal sinuses are the four paired sinuses. And also one more important thing, that these paranasal sinuses that are air-filled are lined by pseudostratified epithelium, and they have mucus secreting goblet cells that are going to secrete the mucus in the nasal cavity and in the sinuses. And if the mucus will get accumulated, it will cause the sinusitis. Now I am going to show you the diagram so that you will be aware of anatomically the position of four paranasal sinuses. Okay, so here in this diagram you can see this is the frontal view of the skull, that is the norma frontalis, and here you can see these are the two paired frontal sinuses in the frontal bone. Around the orbit there are middle ethamoidal sinuses in the ethamoidal bone between the two orbits. Then inferiorly in the maxillary bone, here we can see these are the two maxillary sinuses. While the sphenoid sinus is seen laterally at the level of sphenoid bone, where the greater wing and the lesser wing of sphenoid bone meet. At that point there is the presence of a pterion, and at the pterion there is the presence of a sphenoid sinus. Now we are going to discuss the properties of each sinus one by one. So the first sinus and the first sinus is the frontal sinus. The frontal sinus is a paired and it is about 5 mm in diameter, and it extends into the frontal bone that we have seen in the diagram. Then there are two parts of the frontal sinus. One part is vertical and the other part is horizontal. The frontal sinus develops at the 7th year of age. In the fetus, you can see the frontal sinus at the 7th year of age. Also, one more and very important point, that is the drainage of the frontal sinus. This frontal sinus is going to drain into the semilunar hiatus of the middle nasal meatus through the frontonasal duct. Actually, these all sinuses are going to drain into the nasal meatus, that are the nasal concave present at the lateral wall of nasal cavity, and from there the frontonasal duct into the nasolacrimal duct, and then into the oral cavity. There is a final drainage of these nasal sinuses. So the frontal sinus drain into the and inferiorly into the middle nasal meatus. This is an important point to remember, and it is developed at the 7th year of age. Now coming to the second sinus, that is the ethamoidal sinus. In the most medial sinus between the two orbits, you can find the ethamoidal sinus. Actually, it is a collection of cells. Ethamoidal sinus is a collection of ethamoidal air cells in the ethamoid bone between the nasal cavity and the two orbits that we have seen in the diagram. The ethamoidal sinus develops at the 2nd year of age. 2nd year of age, it develops in the fetus, and it is going to drain into two pathways. It may drain into the middle nasal meatus, or it may drain into the superior nasal meatus. So the anterior and the middle ethamoidal sinus will going to drain into the middle nasal meatus, while the posterior ethamoidal sinus will going to drain into the superior nasal meatus. So these are the 2 points you have to remember very keenly, because this was very much asked in the exams. The anterior and the middle drain into the middle nasal meatus, and the posterior ethamoidal sinus drain into the superior nasal meatus. Because these ethamoidal cells are divided into anterior, middle and posterior, so that's why there is a different drainage system. Now the third one is the sphenoidal sinus. Okay, I have told you that the sphenoidal sinus is present laterally at the level of pterion, where all the lateral bones meet. So the sphenoidal sinus is located in the body of sphenoid bone. In the sphenoid bone, in between the greater and the lesser wing, there is a body of sphenoid bone, and there is a presence of sphenoid sinus in the body of sphenoid bone. Then it is separated from the important structures that are present in the cranial cavity in the norma frontalis. So this sinus having a relation with the important structures. Which are the important structures? You should know. So the important structures in relation to the sphenoid sinus include the optic nerve, the optic chiasma, the pituitary gland, and the internal carotid artery, and somewhat with the cavernous sinus. The cavernous sinus is a sinus of the brain, cranial cavity. So we should have to remember these four structures that are in relation with the sphenoid sinus: the optic nerve, optic chiasma, pituitary gland, internal carotid artery, and the cavernous sinus. Now the drainage, that is also very important. The sphenoid sinus will going to drain into the sphenoethamoidal recess. The sphenoethamoidal recess is a recess present superiorly to the superior nasal meatus. So this is the drainage system for the sphenoid sinus. Now the last sinus that is remained, and that is a very important sinus, is the maxillary sinus. Okay, so we have only three important points about the maxillary sinus that are very much important to remember. The maxillary sinus is present in the bone of maxilla, and this is the largest paranasal sinus. This is the largest paranasal sinus, and it is present in the area like this. That is the apex present superiorly, and then there is a base, and then there is a formation of the area of base here, and then there is an apex, and this is the maxillary sinus that is present in the cranial cavity. The first sinus to develop in the fetus is the maxillary sinus. You have to remember this point. Then we have discussed the ethamoidal sinus develop in the second year of age, and frontal sinus develop into the 7th year of age. It has the four parts: the apex, the body, the roof, and the floor. These four parts of the maxillary sinus are arranged in the bone of the maxilla. The maxillary sinus drains into the middle nasal meatus. The maxillary sinus drains into the middle nasal meatus. You have to remember this point. So until now we have discussed all the four sinuses that are paired sinuses, and mostly they all drain into the middle nasal meatus except the sphenoid sinus and the posterior ethamoidal sinus that may go to drain into the superior nasal meatus. So this was all about the paranasal sinuses, and I hope you'll be explained well and you enjoyed my video. With the easy notes you can get better explained and easy learning. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more.